By the time the first light crept over the eastern Ukrainian horizon, the corridor was already a graveyard of steel. 23 Russian armored vehicles, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers sat destroyed, abandoned, or burning across a stretch of ground that Russian commanders had, just hours earlier, designated as their breakthrough axis. They never broke through. They never came close. This is what happened. This is how Ukrainian forces, drone operators, anti-tank crews, snipers, artillerymen, executed one of the most complete armored ambushes seen on this front in recent weeks. And this is what it cost Russia in steel, money, and men. The intelligence picture had been building for nearly 48 hours before the assault began. Ukrainian reconnaissance drone teams operating along the contact line in eastern Ukraine had been logging Russian vehicle concentrations, assembling just beyond the forward edge. The signatures were unmistakable: fuel trucks repositioning in the late evening, ammunition resupply runs conducted under partial cover, tank engines cycling for warm-up in the hours before a planned move. Ukrainian commanders read every one of those signals. They knew a column was coming. They knew approximately where it would enter. And rather than strike the assembly area early and scatter the force, they made a deliberate choice. Wait. Let the column commit. Let it enter the corridor. Then close both ends and destroy it piece by piece. That patience is itself a form of tactical discipline that deserves recognition. It is not instinctive to hold fire when you can see the enemy massing. It requires trust in your plan, trust in your timing, and trust in the capabilities of every element in the engagement sequence. Ukrainian commanders had all three. Ukrainian military intelligence along the Eastern Front operates through layered observation. Satellite imagery shared through partner channels provides macro-level pattern recognition. The assembly of logistics nodes, the repositioning of fuel and ammunition supply points, the movement of engineering assets that typically precede a planned offensive push. Drone reconnaissance provides the tactical picture. The specific vehicles, their positions, their movement patterns, the state of their maintenance, the behavior of their crews. Electronic intelligence intercepts provide the third layer: communications traffic between Russian unit commanders and their higher headquarters. Logistical coordination calls, timing discussions that, even when partially encrypted, reveal operational intent through their pattern and frequency. In the days before this assault, all three layers were active and converging on the same picture. Ukrainian analysts watching the electronic traffic noted a sharp increase in communications between the Russian armored unit and its logistics chain. Fuel requests, ammunition resupply confirmations, maintenance queries that suggested vehicles were being prepared for movement. The drone observation confirmed the physical picture: vehicles being concentrated, positioned, and oriented in a pattern consistent with a planned corridor assault. The broader intelligence picture showed no significant repositioning of Russian reserves that might suggest a feint, no alternative axis of preparation that might indicate this was diversionary. It was a genuine push. The Russians were coming, and Ukrainian commanders had everything they needed to prepare a reception. The briefing that preceded the engagement was detailed and specific. Every element of the ambush, the FPV teams, the anti-tank missile crews, the sniper positions, the infantry blocking elements, the artillery spotters, was given a precise role, a precise sector, and a precise trigger condition. The FPV teams knew their priority targets: the lead vehicle and the tail vehicle. The anti-tank crews knew their engagement sequence: work inward from the disabled ends, systematically, do not rush, do not waste missiles on burning targets. The sniper teams knew their sectors: eastern exit covered from 400 meters. Any dismounted movement into that ground engaged immediately without waiting for additional authorization. The infantry blocking elements knew their positions: northern and southern exits from the tree line, sealed and held before the column began its move. This level of coordination does not emerge spontaneously. It is the product of a command culture that has learned, through hard experience across years of conflict, that combined arms integration is not a theoretical concept. It is a survival requirement, and it requires that every element of the force understands not only its own role, but the roles of every adjacent element, so that when the chaos of combat disrupts the plan, each unit can adapt without losing coherence with the overall effort. Ukrainian forces have developed that culture. It is visible in how they fight. It was visible on this night. The column began moving approximately 3 hours before dawn. Lead elements, 2 T-72B3 main battle tanks, and a BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicle entered the forest corridor first, exactly as drone observation had predicted. Ukrainian FPV teams, positioned at multiple points along the expected route, had already been briefed and were watching. Each team had a designated kill zone. The instruction was precise: do not engage until the command. Wait for the column's tail to clear the tree line. Then seal the exit. At the signal, the first FPV drone struck the lead T-72, a direct hit to the engine compartment, disabling the vehicle and blocking the corridor without immediately detonating the ammunition load. 30 seconds later, a second drone struck the rearmost armored personnel carrier, collapsing a section of roadside embankment and walling and everything between. The trap was shut. 23 vehicles caught in a 2-kilometer kill zone with no viable exit in either direction. What followed lasted approximately 40 minutes. Ukrainian anti-tank missile teams, having pre-registered their firing positions against the corridor coordinates days earlier, began engaging systematically. Not frantically. Systematically. Vehicle after vehicle acquired, engaged, destroyed in sequence. 2 T-72s reversed into the ditch, attempting to turn around. Both became immediately immobilized in the soft April ground, the spring thaw having saturated the soil on either side of the track. A BMP attempted to push through a gap in the tree line. An FPV drone caught it before it cleared the wood. The crew bailed. Ukrainian snipers positioned 400 meters to the east were already watching that ground. The overcast sky that evening, low cloud ceilings, no moonlight, may have given Russian commanders confidence in their movement. That confidence was misplaced. Ukrainian thermal-equipped drones operate effectively under cloud cover. The infrared signatures of armored vehicle engines, running warm after hours of preparation and movement, are clearly visible to thermal imaging systems, regardless of what the sky looks like above them. The darkness that Russian planners saw as concealment was, through Ukrainian drone goggles, a backdrop that made thermal signatures sharper by contrast. Every vehicle in that column was visible from the moment it entered the corridor. The soft ground was the second factor Russian commanders failed to account for. The April thaw had been working on the soil for weeks before this engagement. The corridor track was hard-surfaced. The ground on either side was not. Any Russian vehicle that attempted to leave the track, to maneuver around a disabled vehicle to find an exit through the tree line, immediately faced the risk of bogging in mud that would hold a 45-ton tank as effectively as any physical obstacle. When 2 T-72s reversed into the ditch and became immobilized, they were not simply unlucky. They drove into a condition Ukrainian planners had specifically anticipated and built into the geometry of the kill zone. The ground itself was a weapon. Ukrainian planners understood it. Russian commanders did not. The sniper element of this engagement deserves specific examination because it illustrates a dimension of modern combined arms fighting that receives less attention than drone warfare, but is no less consequential. Sniper teams had been pre-positioned on the eastern side of the corridor before the column began to move. Their assigned role was defined and specific: engage dismounted Russian soldiers who abandoned vehicles into their sector. As the armored vehicles began to burn and Russian crews were forced to exit, they moved into open ground that Ukrainian sniper teams had already mapped, ranged, and divided into overlapping sectors. Soldiers who exited east encountered precision fire immediately. Soldiers who moved west found Ukrainian infantry blocking elements that had quietly moved into position during the first phase of the ambush. There was no clean direction to move. Russian soldiers, many of them conscripts with minimal rest and inadequate preparation, faced a choice between burning vehicles and open ground under Ukrainian fire. Multiple intercepts from the engagement indicate that Russian unit commanders were unable to reach their rear command for nearly 20 minutes. Communications were disrupted by a combination of Ukrainian electronic warfare assets and the physical destruction of the vehicles that had been carrying relay equipment. The Russian infantry component, approximately 60 soldiers who had been riding in the BTRs and IFVs, disintegrated as a fighting force within the first 15 minutes of the engagement. Ukrainian FPV operators working through their priority target sequence moved with the efficiency that comes from hundreds of hours of operational experience. Anti-tank missile crews, watching through thermal sights as Russian vehicles attempted to maneuver in the confined space, found that the density of the trapped column made targeting almost automatic. There was nowhere for the vehicles to go that placed them outside a valid engagement solution. Artillery spotters called corrections as secondary explosions from destroyed vehicles created smoke that partially obscured the thermal picture. The system adapted in real time. The results held. By the time the last secondary explosion had subsided and Ukrainian commanders were able to conduct their initial field assessment, the scope of the result was clear. 23 vehicles. The Russian push had ceased to exist as a combat formation. Ukraine had not merely defended. Ukraine had hunted a column into a prepared killing ground and dismantled it methodically. Now, let's be precise about what this cost Russia. Because the numbers that follow are not abstract. They represent real industrial capacity, real state expenditure, and real strategic pressure on a military already stretched to the limits of its production capability. A T-72B3M, the modernized variant confirmed in this engagement, carries a replacement cost of approximately $2.5 to $3 million USD at pre-war Russian defense pricing. Under current conditions, with Western sanctions cutting off access to foreign microelectronics, thermal imaging components, and precision manufacturing materials, the effective replacement cost runs substantially higher. Independent defense economists estimate the current real cost inside Russia's constrained supply chain at $3.5 to $4.5 million per unit. 6 confirmed tank losses in this engagement. Conservatively, $21 to $27 million in tank losses alone. The BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles destroyed carry a replacement cost of approximately $1.8 to $2.2 million each. 3 confirmed BMP losses. $5.4 to $6.6 million. The BTR armored personnel carriers run $600,000 to $900,000 per unit. 8 confirmed losses add $4.8 to $7.2 million. Support vehicles, fuel trucks, and communications equipment destroyed or abandoned. An additional $1.2 to $2 million total direct material loss for this single overnight engagement, conservatively between $32 million and $43 million USD. For one column, one night. One failed attempt at a breakthrough that was identified, tracked, and destroyed before it had traveled 2 kilometers into Ukrainian-controlled ground. But the direct cost figure alone does not capture the full weight of what happened here. Russia's defense industrial base is operating under severe and documented strain. Western sanctions have forced Russian manufacturers to substitute domestic alternatives and repurpose civilian components, including, as has been verified in multiple captured vehicles, consumer electronics chips in systems that previously relied on imported military-grade components. This is not a sustainable production model. Every vehicle that burns in eastern Ukraine is not only a financial loss, it is a production loss. At current Russian wartime manufacturing rates, replacing a T-72B3M takes an estimated 6 to 9 months, assuming supply chain stability that does not currently exist. Russia has been drawing on long-term storage reserves to supplement active production. Older T-62 and T-55 frames, refurbished rather than newly manufactured, pulled from depots to fill gaps that combat losses have created. These are not equivalent replacements in a modern combined arms engagement against a force equipped with current anti-armor systems and integrated drone fires. They are stopgaps, and stopgaps do not solve the underlying problem. They delay it while it compounds. Look at what Ukrainian recovery teams found when they moved through the engagement area. Several Russian vehicles showed clear signs of deferred maintenance. Components that should have been serviced had not been. Improvised cage armor welded over turrets to defeat drone strikes was inconsistently fabricated and had partially dislodged on multiple vehicles before the engagement even began, suggesting construction under time pressure rather than deliberate preparation. Ammunition stowage in at least 2 of the destroyed IFVs indicated loading beyond recommended capacity. A dangerous compromise driven by supply uncertainty, one that almost certainly contributed to the violence of the secondary explosions when those vehicles were struck. These details are not incidental. They are indicators of a force making compromises that increase risk to its own personnel, because the alternative, waiting for adequate supply and proper maintenance, is not an option that Russian commanders at the front level currently have available to them. A well-supplied, properly maintained armored force does not enter combat with loose cage armor and overloaded ammunition bays. Those compromises happen when the supply chain is strained, when maintenance cycles cannot be completed, when commanders are under institutional pressure to push vehicles forward, regardless of readiness state. The manpower dimension adds another layer to the economic picture. The Russian soldiers lost in this engagement represent individuals with varying levels of training, from contract professionals with years of operational service to mobilized conscripts who received weeks of preparation before deployment. Both categories represent state investment, training infrastructure, equipment issuance, logistic support. And both categories, once lost, create pressure on Russian manpower pipelines that are already showing documented strain through repeated mobilization waves, continuously lowered physical and age standards, and the expanding use of penal formations drawn from the prison population. Russian planners along this section of the Eastern Front have been attempting armored corridor assaults with consistent regularity over recent weeks. The logic, from a Russian perspective, is not irrational on paper. Concentrate armor, suppress defensive positions with artillery preparation, move fast through a gap before defenders can reposition, exploit the breakthrough into softer rear areas. It is a doctrine drawn from Soviet-era combined arms theory. Against a defender without adequate anti-armor capability, without drone intelligence, without integrated fires, it functions as designed. The problem Russia faces is that it is not fighting that defender. Ukrainian forces in eastern Ukraine have spent years developing exactly the layered defensive system that turns Russian armored corridor doctrine into a targeting solution. Every element of the doctrine that makes it dangerous in theory becomes a vulnerability in practice when the defender can see the column forming, can track its movement, can seal its exits, and can engage it simultaneously from multiple vectors with pre-registered fires. The Russian soldiers who entered that corridor were executing an order from a command structure that sent them into a kill zone Ukrainian defenders had already prepared. The failure was not individual. It was institutional, a command decision to attempt an approach that has repeatedly failed, using a force not adequately informed about the defensive preparation it was moving into, relying on tactical assumptions that Ukrainian defenders have made obsolete through hundreds of engagements. The commanders who ordered this assault are not bearing the consequences of it. The soldiers who executed the order did. That asymmetry between those who make the decisions and those who absorb the results is visible throughout the pattern of Russian operational behavior in this conflict. Commanders who send columns into prepared kill zones and survive the after-action reporting cycle continue to operate. The columns do not. Ukrainian defenders operate in a fundamentally different system. A Ukrainian FPV operator whose strike fails adjusts technique before the next operation. The feedback loop is direct and immediate. The improvement is continuous. Ukrainian forces fighting today are better than Ukrainian forces fighting 6 months ago. Not only because of equipment, but because of a developed institutional capacity to learn from every engagement and incorporate those lessons before the next one begins. This is the asymmetry that Russian commanders face and appear unable to solve. Russia can replace vehicles, slowly, expensively, with declining quality. Russia can replace soldiers through mobilization waves that produce recruits of diminishing training and motivation. Russia cannot replace the institutional knowledge, the tactical experience, and the command relationships that its losses in engagements like this one represent. Every experienced contract soldier killed in a corridor in eastern Ukraine is a training and leadership resource that takes years to develop. Every junior officer eliminated in a failed assault is a gap in the command structure that no mobilized replacement can fill on any useful timeline. The soldiers who held that ambush position in eastern Ukraine, who spent the pre-dawn hours in the cold watching thermal screens, waiting for the command, trusting that every other element of the plan was in position, did not do so because they had no choice. They did so because they understood what the ground they were defending represented. It is Ukrainian ground, it was invaded, and they chose, each of them individually, to be the force that made that invasion cost more than Russia can bear to pay. 23 vehicles. between $32 and $43 million USD. An entire Russian assault formation eliminated before it could fire a single effective shot at a Ukrainian defensive position. Step back from the individual engagement and look at what this represents at the broader operational level, because the significance extends far beyond one column on one night in eastern Ukraine. Russian military planners have been attempting armored corridor assaults along this section of the front with regularity. The pattern is consistent and documented. A concentration of vehicles assembles. Artillery preparation fires against identified Ukrainian positions. The column moves. It encounters a defensive response that it has not adequately prepared for. It suffers severe losses. The after-action reports move up the chain. New orders come down. Another column assembles. The cycle repeats. This is not an accident. It is an institutional failure. And understanding why it keeps happening reveals something important about the structural condition of Russian ground forces at this stage of the conflict. Russian operational planning at the unit level operates within a command culture that punishes initiative and rewards compliance. A commander who deviates from the assigned plan, even in response to new information that makes the plan obviously unworkable, risks severe institutional consequences. A commander who executes the assigned plan and fails is in a much safer position than one who adapted without authorization and succeeded. This dynamic, deeply embedded in the organizational culture of the Russian military, produces commanders who push forward with approaches that are visibly failing, because the alternative, admitting the approach is wrong before it has been fully attempted, carries personal costs that are too high. The soldiers in those vehicles pay the price for that dynamic. They are not the authors of the decision. They are the executors. And on this night in eastern Ukraine, executing the decision meant entering a corridor that Ukrainian forces had already turned into a kill zone. The FPV drone operators who sealed the column's exits on this night did so with a precision that reflects the specific technological and doctrinal evolution Ukrainian forces have undergone. The fiber-optic tethered variants of FPV drones that Ukrainian teams have deployed in recent months are immune to the radio frequency jamming that Russian vehicles carry. They fly a physical cable to the operator rather than a radio link. Russian jammers, operating across standard control frequency bands, have no effect on a signal that travels through copper wire rather than electromagnetic space. When Ukrainian operators flew those specific drones against the column's lead and tail vehicles on this night, the Russian jamming systems mounted on those very vehicles were irrelevant. The technology gap opened and Ukrainian operators flew straight through it. The anti-tank missile teams that engaged the column's interior represent a different dimension of Ukrainian capability, one built on rigorous pre-engagement preparation. The firing positions had been established, cleared of obstacles, and registered against the corridor coordinates before the column began to move. When the engagement started, Ukrainian missile operators were not choosing positions, were not estimating ranges, were not improvising sight lines. They were executing pre-planned shots from pre-confirmed positions against pre-registered coordinates. The cognitive load of the engagement was dramatically reduced because the preparation had been so thorough. Reduced cognitive load under fire translates directly into more accurate, more rapid, more effective fires. It is a multiplier that no amount of Russian electronic warfare or armored mass can simply overwhelm. The artillery element, operating in coordination with ground spotters and drone observation, applied fires that shaped the engagement zone and disrupted Russian attempts to organize any coherent response. Russian crews who attempted to shelter behind disabled vehicles found themselves engaged by artillery that could adjust to their new positions within minutes of those positions being reported. The responsiveness of Ukrainian fires to dynamic targets, a capability built through years of practice integrating drone observation with artillery coordination, meant that the corridor offered no stable point of relative safety for Russian soldiers once the engagement began. What this engagement demonstrates, when viewed in its entirety, is not simply that Ukraine won a tactical engagement. It demonstrates that Ukrainian forces have built a defensive system that is, at this moment, operationally superior to the offensive approach Russia is deploying against it. That superiority is not a function of any single capability. It is a function of integration, the ability to combine drone intelligence, FPV strike, anti-tank fires, sniper positioning, infantry blocking, electronic warfare, and artillery coordination into a single coherent system where each element enables and amplifies the others. Russia can defeat one of those elements in isolation. Jamming can defeat some drone types. Armor can absorb some anti-tank fires. Artillery can suppress some sniper positions. But when all of those elements operate in combination, and when the combination has been rehearsed, coordinated, and executed by forces who understand not only their own role, but the logic of the entire system, Russian countermeasures that work against individual components find themselves overwhelmed by the combined effect. That is what happened in eastern Ukraine on this night. And it is what has been happening with variations in terrain and specific capabilities across the Eastern Front with increasing consistency. The burning vehicles in that corridor are evidence. The retained Ukrainian positions are evidence. The unchanged front line, held not given up, defended not abandoned, is evidence. Ukraine fights. Ukraine wins. And the ground in eastern Ukraine holds.